welcome back to the Mysteria podcast, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a little bit of a hiatus for me, so it's excellent to come back and to be speaking with Mr. Roger Lockshier for the third time. Always a pleasure to see you, Roger. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well, Marcus. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. So we did two podcasts. Well, it was supposed to be one that happily turned into two. And during the course of those two podcasts, we primarily focused on your book, We Saved SOG Souls. Excellent book. So goes without saying that you need to go and buy this book if you're listening or watching. We run through it in those two podcasts. And for today, we're going to kind of pick up where we left off on the second time. We did cover it a little bit on the tail end of that second episode, discussing the time when you got back home. And what interested me about that is kind of the thing that maybe as a reader, and I'll just speak from my own perspective, but I think a lot of people share this sentiment, is that as a reader, I sometimes forget that this is the person who wrote this book, being you in this case, is an actual person. This is a real person who had real experiences. You have feelings, you have memories, you have people who care about you. There's people that you care about. And so it's kind of interesting when you get pulled into such a compelling story, which yours obviously is. But then the other part of me wonders, that human side, because obviously not many people, unless you faced combat, that's kind of a small percentage of people who can truly relate to just what that feels like and what that does to an individual. But regardless of that, I still think that there's so much wisdom and there's so many different experiences that can help people out in so many different ways just by listening and just by understanding. And I think just in general too, it also helps you build empathy and just to understand where somebody came from and, what was their process for getting through tough times and getting through good times. What did that look like? What did that feel like? So I've become a lot more interested in the human side of, as it were. And so that's kind of where we're going to start, especially because coming out of the Vietnam War, that war in itself was unique as to how the public perceived it. And then just that era of time. So just kind of trying to understand more of the experiences that you went through. And so I think we'll just kind of jump in. And I know like a couple of these topics we did briefly cover. So we'll just kind of go over it again for sake of today. And then we'll just kind of have at it and let it go. So I guess kind of one of the things, and we'll kind of go more or less chronologically, like we don't have to, but it's just sort of kind of like a natural progression at least. But we'll jump around as we need to. I'm just looking at my notes. Prioritizing. I'm like, where do we want to jump in here? But why don't you just tell us? So you get home, you fly out of Vietnam, and all of a sudden you're just back home. You're in Connecticut.
Right.
What's running through your head? What was that like?
Well, I wasn't totally prepared for the environment that the country was in at that time. As you know, I volunteered to go into the military. I volunteered to go airborne. I volunteered to be in gunship helicopters. I volunteered to be with SOG and running those top secret missions. So basically for the past 3 years, I was very intently and intensely involved with people of very similar mindset and a very specialized group of people. I wasn't involved with anybody that had questions, not so much questions, but didn't like what was going on with the war, let's say, or was against the war or against fighting and this and that. So consequently, and I knew there was, protesting that was going on before I went over.
Okay.
But I really was kind of insulated from how serious it was and how intense it was for a Vietnam vet coming home. So, but I found out very quickly what that was like and what to expect. So that was a surprise and a disappointment. I mean, there were no welcoming parades. Not that you wanted a parade, but aside from my family and a few very, very close friends, there was no welcome home, and just had to pick up the pieces of my life that I left 3 years ago and figure out and try to move forward. So fortunately for me, I had, which was my girlfriend, for the year before I went to Vietnam, waiting for me. And as soon as I did get home, she made it very clear that she waited a year and wanted to get married, as soon as possible. So I got home the very November 30th, 1968. Christmas Eve, the following month, 3 weeks later, we got engaged. And then we got married February 1st.
Oh, wow.
Which I'm sure my family, their heads were probably spinning. They probably thought I, was making a big mistake, that, for this to happen so quickly and whatnot. But it was, for me, it was a blessing. It really was, because it was hard going from being in combat and intense combat, virtually every day. Every time I got in the aircraft, it was because we were going to have a gunfight. I mean, that's what it was. We weren't moving supplies around. We weren't moving troops around. We were, every time we got called in the air, every time we went in the air, we're going to a firefight, or we're going to go start a firefight, and that was it. So, from going from that to, you have to blend in with civilian life and with your surroundings that are not too favorable for a vet at that time. That was a challenge. That was really a challenge. So getting married really soon like that was a lifesaver for me. That gave me a focus. It gave me a new focus, right, where I could focus on somebody else. I mean, and not the ghosts that are hanging on to me, and all, the demons that are, knocking at the door. So that was a big change. I very quickly, in the workplace, I went right back to the company that I had left 3 years prior.
Wow.
Yeah, went right back. Started on my apprenticeship, continued my apprenticeship, because I was going to get married. I needed work, and again, a focus. I had to have a focus. Put the background in a compartment, and try to keep it deep in that compartment. During my work experience, early on, after I got home, I encountered some issues with an employee, another employee that was by the only way I can describe it is a loser. If he was here today, he would be a loser. I mean, he was just a scumbag, and he almost challenged me. I mean, he tested me for sure in the workplace, and by saying something to the effect of, you vets think you have something, entitled to something, or you're owed something, and or you're always trying to prove something, and so with that, I just basically told him, stay away from me. Just stay away from me. Don't bother me. Stay away. But there was so much negative going on with Vietnam vets, with alcoholism and drugs, and mental illness. So it was a part-time job, keeping myself from falling into what someone would perceive as one of those. So with that, I kept everything to myself. I kept my background to myself. That wasn't easy. That wasn't easy at all. I mean, the nightmares came shortly after I got home, and I say nightmares, but in most cases it was night terrors to the extreme. And so the subconscious was coming through in its way, but during the day, that was it was non-existent. So it was a challenge. It was a challenge for me. I was starting to, or continuing to drink a little bit, and when my first son was born, which was just a year later, the following January, that again, I mean, this gave me a focus, a focus. And I thought, I've got to stop this. Not that I wasn't drinking severe, but I knew that it could easily go that way. So I basically consciously backed away from that. Of course, have beer now and then, or a scotch now and then, but became very aware of what I didn't want to be, because the tendency was there, and the ease of going in that direction was certainly there. So I had to focus on my wife, focused on my new child, new son. A great thing, a really good thing. So yeah, in the early days, coming home for a Vietnam vet, and it was no different for me than it was for all the thousands of others that came home. Fortunately, my support was my wife, and then my child. For those who weren't as fortunate, they really, a lot fell by the wayside. And a lot of friends that I have today are on their second marriage or third marriage. I think most are in that situation. And they all will tell you that they were a jerk. That, it wasn't their wife, it was them, in most cases. So yeah, coming home in 1960, I came home at the very end of 68, but say 69. It was not a friendly environment. It was not a friendly, it wasn't, I grew up watching the films and newsreels of from World War II, when when the men came home and they're welcomed with open arms and celebrations and this and that. Now this wasn't like that at all. It was just the opposite. It was just the opposite. So it was better that people didn't know that I served. So I kind of, kept it to myself. There were a few people, obviously, that knew. But other than that, meeting new people and whatnot, no, there was none of that. For many reasons also. Coming back, I was 23, going on 24. People I knew from before I went in the service, who were the same age. When I would meet them, I felt like I was talking to a high school kid.
Right.
No, seriously. I mean, I felt like, I went in the military at 19, 20, just before my 20th birthday. And I came out 3 years later feeling like I was in my mid 40s or so. It was just very different, very different. I couldn't, had nothing in common with the people that I knew, as a teenager. So again, my family and my growing family was, for me, that was the lifesaver for sure. For sure. My wife was very tolerant, and very understanding. She didn't want to know about some of the things. She couldn't be told about a lot of things, but still, I mean, the emotional support was there, and the focus. The other things are compartmentalized, and there's my focus. Yeah.
Yeah, you touched on several things there, so I just want to kind of rattle through them and we'll carry on. But first of all, that is incredibly romantic. I will say.
Yeah.
It's very romantic. I mean, that's
well,
a positive.
54 years later, she's still there.
And that's even better. That's even better. Makes the story even better. Right?
Is that incredible?
No, that really, for so many reasons.
Oh, yeah. Most of it wasn't for my doing.
Right. That's right. But yeah, and we talked a lot about that, more so in the second podcast, but the focus, like just this idea of focus, and obviously the context of that was, how do you block out fear and uncertainty in order to do your job? Because if you fail to do your job, then that could result in you being killed or your friends being killed. So the consequences of those actions for that job it doesn't get any more extreme than that. And so it's interesting then that the shift in focus then turned towards love and care for your wife, and then shortly after, then your son. So just to recognize that is pretty interesting. And that's also interesting as far as like a coping mechanism, as far as going from such an extreme environment. And as you said, you weren't just fighting, you guys were fighting in the secret war, right? So as we know from the several podcasts with John and yourself now, understanding that type of combat is so extreme. And then to just like someone flicked a switch and now you're in Connecticut again is shocking. And also now with the knowledge that we have about just traumatic brain injury and just the concussive force of being around charges, and you did get shot in the head as well. So, let's not forget that. So, they're also, as far as understanding how the brain functions, it's just incredibly, incredibly complicated. And I understand about 0.1% of it, but not only do you have the psychological aspect, but also the anatomical part of it too. So there's just so many different things going on. It makes it extremely difficult to decipher and then figure out a course of action on how to move through that, because that's such choppy waters to move through on a good day. And then just as you pointed out, well, for some people, if they have bad days, what's that going to look like? What are they going to turn to? And then it becomes, well, it's so difficult to cope with, then it's substances or it's certain, risky behaviors or whatever that might be, because it's either an escape or it's coping, whatever it may be. But it just seems like such a complicated thing to work itself through. And you touched on something as well, because I was thinking it, it sounds kind of goofy to even relate. It's so difficult to kind of relate my own experiences to it, but I'm going to try.
No, go ahead.
But, with like the very few experiences that I've had in the athletic domain of really pushing your body to achieve things that are difficult, I have a difficult time relating to people my own age, just because my focus and the things that I'm looking towards achieving just are kind of not in alignment with most. And that's not a judgment thing. I used to be judgmental about that, but I like to think I've matured and I'm just a little bit more empathetic. So I've gotten over that aspect of it, but it still is difficult to relate to people my own age. And as you were saying it, because I was going to bring it up in the back of my head, I'm like, you left for 3 years. It might as well have been 30. When you think of the amount of things that you had to deal with and the things that you just saw and experienced, like you are going to mature for better or for worse, right? Because, some of those things were pretty terrible. But then like, you're just kind of like, you come back and you're like, man, I'm like 23 years old. And, it's just, so even that, like, just to briefly touch on that, and then I got a couple other things, but how did you kind of cope with that? Like, did you just kind of say to yourself, like, okay, I just got to focus on what I got going on? And did you just kind of sort of surrender to that and just, let's just move on?
I think, it's part of that I just need to focus on, what I'm doing and moving on. But the other thing is that, and I connected more with fellows that were older. My closest friend for many years, up until he passed away a few years ago. He was 6 or 7 years older than me. And he was in the Marine Corps for a short while, and much earlier than me, but got injured, not combat, but got injured and was released. But he lost a brother in World War II that was in the Marine Corps. So it was easy to connect with him. He was very, very empathetic and very sensitive to, to kind of what I was going through, even though I didn't necessarily share everything with him. I mean, I would tell him this so-and-so that we worked with was a real a-hole. and he said, you didn't need to tell me that. He said, I've known him for 4 years. He's been, but, and it was just older people that I was able to really connect with on a friendship basis, better. Not exclusively, but in generally, because again, I didn't have any contact with any other military vets at that time, in the early days, and that was partly by choice, and partly just from the fact that there was no one that I served with anywhere near, Connecticut. And so, it was different. It was different. And so I think part of it is moving on, putting that in the background, putting that in the compartment, and looking forward, moving forward. And I was always very, very goal oriented. And I could always, and still today, I can focus on something and block things out. I could be writing with the TV on, and not even know what's going on over there, but I can, so it was easy for me to focus on the day-to-day moving forward activities for the most part, but there was a big gap. There was a big gap in my soul where I had no one to share this experiences with. And
relating to the asshole coworker, there's something that you said to me in because I guess we chatted a few weeks ago now to set this podcast up, and so we chatted for a while, and so taking my notes, and there's something that you said to me that I've thought about almost every day since. I've thought about it a lot. And really? Part of it was also related to some MMA training that I'm doing. So let me connect the dots here, or attempt to at least. So the thing that you said was don't react in alignment with the stereotype. And so that had more to do with the context of in 1979 when Apocalypse Now came out. We'll get to that story. Yeah. But it also relates to this individual too, who obviously doesn't like the face he sees in the mirror. And so rather than, he wasn't talking to you by saying, oh, you vets have something to prove, or he might as well be looking in the mirror saying that, because that always is the situation. Yeah. But the reason that I've been thinking about this a lot is the key word in there is react to me. And so how I connected this, I was in the middle of a training exercise. So we're doing boxing, some boxing exercises. And the thing, I'll do my best to demo this on the camera. This might not look good, but that's okay. But we're basically just doing a jab exercise. And so the instructor throws a jab at me. And what you do is you parry it with your right hand in front of your face. And as soon as you parry it, you step forward and you throw a jab in return. And that's what you do. And you sync it up with your footwork. And so we're doing this drill. And in the middle of it, I'm like, oh, that's what Roger was talking about. Because you come at me with the shot, you come to hit me in the face, and I parry you and I hit you right back. Yeah. I don't think about it. It's just, this is what we do. We just, and I hit you right back. And so it was in the middle of this routine, and I kind of had like this little moment to myself, and that's good. Was like, you good? Like, and I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm good.
That's great. And that is so, to not react naturally, natural reflex to react. That was challenging at times. I mean, it really was. It was really challenging. It would have been so much easier just to react. I mean, that particular loser, I wanted to hit him
repeatedly, I'm sure,
and just put his lights out so quickly. But again, I cannot react to these people that are trying to put you in a box. So I'm glad you thought about that.
Oh yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot. And it was interesting how it kind of connected for me doing this punching drill. Yeah. Because and my instinct as well, just as an individual, is I don't know if I necessarily am a bit of a, well, I don't know, maybe my teammates might disagree with me in hockey, but hothead for sure. Where it's just like, you hit me, so I'm going to hit you back, but I'm going to hit you way harder than you hit me. Yeah. And it's just sort of that instinct. So I've really had to work on that because I get penalties all the time, and that's not a good thing for the team, right?
That's not good. No.
So, and obviously, I'm talking about, beer league hockey that really has no effect on the outside world at all. But it's not because it has no effect, because it does. It does. Not what I do on the ice necessarily, but internally, because I'm carrying that mindset, that behavior of, if you're going to hit me, I'm going to hit you right back, and I'm going to hit you immediately. And just having that understanding of, well, can I be better than that? Because it's going to feel really good for a couple seconds after I hit you back. I'm going to feel really good. But then the chances are I'm probably going to feel like an ass after. Because it's like, well, is that really the level that I'm capable of carrying myself? Or am I actually capable of being a little bit more put together and not reactive? You know, that's the difference. And so, yeah, so it's, you know, having thought about that was quite interesting. But getting back to the topic at hand. So actually, let's jump back to, what is this here? 1975. So that's when the US started to vacate Vietnam.
Right.
So several years have gone by. So we'll call it 1969, once you got home and more or less settled, or began to attempt to settle in. And actually, sorry, really quickly before I get to that, I forgot one other thing. So when it came to the, kind of throw it at you, but when it came to the drinking, it obviously sounds like you were pretty introspective with that, because based on what you said, it really shines clear to me that you could see a trend, and you could also see how something like that can get out of hand quickly. Was that something that you processed kind of automatically, or was that something that, and you obviously mentioned that there were other vets who, you know, in some cases they you know, died because of the substance issues got out of hand, or mental illness, you know, contributed, you know, to a bit of a chicken and egg thing going on there. But what was that like for you? Like, was that something that you consciously recognized, and so then you sort of put the pieces together and understood, okay, we need to figure this out?
No, it was something that I consciously recognized, and not that it was a problem. It wasn't a problem
Yet.
But I recognized I didn't want it to be.
That's right.
a problem. And I also, I've got this little baby now, as my little son, and thinking, wait a minute, you know, I want to set an example. You know, I don't want to fall into the trap that so many, not only veterans, but so many people fall into. I don't want to go that way. So yeah, it was a conscious effort, and it wasn't based out of fear or anything like that. It was just, it just, to me, it was what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to become.
Situational awareness.
Yeah, situational awareness. Exactly.
Yeah. So now we'll go to 19. I just wanted to ask you about that. But yeah, so once the U.S. started to leave Vietnam, so yeah, so we're about 6 years later. How were you kind of right up until that point? And then what effect, if any, did, because then obviously that would have been in the news, so, you know, would have became another talking point, at least in the public sphere. So how were you doing kind of shortly before that point? And then how did that affect you?
Well, it was leading up to 1975, you know. Each year, each month, each year that progressed, it was becoming more and more apparent how the country was so much against what was going on in Vietnam, all against the war, against soldiers, you know, the whole thing. I was, by the time that the U.S. started pulling out in 1975, that was starting to wear on me heavy, of what I did, you know, the many friends that I lost in the process of trying to do what they believe was the right thing for their country. And, what's going on was, did I go into combat and shoot all these people and their lives for nothing? All the friends that I lost who gave it all, was it all just for nothing, for waste? Return it right back over, the country right back over to the communists. I went there. I joined the military in an attempt to do my part to defeat communism. Now we're just going to give it all back, So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff weighing heavy. Should I have done what I did? I enjoyed what I was doing, what I did. I didn't have to do it. Was I wrong? Did I, do all this in vain? Were all these lives lost, people I knew and was close to, was that all in vain? So it was getting to be a dark time for me. And there was a coworker that was a World War II vet, not a US vet. He was a German vet. He was raised in Germany, brought up in Germany by a well-to-do family. He grew up in the shadows and in the training of the Third Reich, if you would. He went to military school in the lower grades. He went into military school into the high school years, into college, went to military academy, and became an officer in the German army, the regular German army, not the Gestapo, not the SS, the regular German army. Anyway, he was a fellow that was very quiet. He kept to himself. Very nice man. I knew him before I went into the military. He worked in the same place. I knew him then before, and like I say, he was a very quiet person. He kept to himself, and he was a very, very patriotic, American patriotic citizen. He wore that on his sleeve. He really did. I mean, he loved this country. And one day, he approached me, and this was during the height of what was going on, and said something to the effect of, Roger, anytime you'd like to talk about what's going on and how you're feeling, I'm here to talk to you. And I said thank you, and put it in the compartment. A short while later, I don't know if it was a few days or a week or two, whatever, but he approached me again, and it was probably showing in my demeanor, no doubt, because I wouldn't say I was shut down, but I was not really interacting with people very much. I was just trying to stay focused on my job and whatnot. Anyway, he approached me and he said, hey, let's go out at lunchtime. Let's go out and sit outside. Sunny day and whatever. So I did. And so we went out there, and he started sharing with me what his background was. I mean, I knew he was a World War II vet from Germany that migrated into the US from Canada. I knew that. I knew that supposedly he was an officer. Other than that, I didn't know anything. So he proceeded to tell me his life story. And up until when he was wounded during the Battle of the Bulge. And he said that when the Americans came in, and he was in the hospital, I guess, and the Americans came in and were so good to him. And he said, and then he was also at that same time realizing that everything he was told, everything he believed in, everything about the German, being a better race, and everything, he said, everything that I knew and believed in up until this point in my life was a lie. He said, my whole life was a lie. And he said, and yet, he said, the Americans, the evil Americans, came in and they took such good care of me. And they were good. And, he said, so I went through all of this. I thought my country had betrayed me. He said, but he said, it wasn't really my country that betrayed me, but the leaders that were calling the shots. And he said something to the effect, I hope you don't ever think that your country, lied to you or betrayed you. And don't ever think that what you did and your dedication was wrong. He said, you did what you believed was right. He said, I did what I believed was right. He said, I didn't know about all these atrocities. And he said, I was a soldier. I was a professional soldier. And he said, so, don't feel that way. Try not to feel that way if that's bothering you. And I mean, these are not all exact words. I mean, this is going back to, 1975. But that was the general gist of the conversation. And I'll tell you what, it helped tremendously. I mean, I felt like this, this cloud was kind of not gone, but, lifted away a little bit. And I felt much better. And he and I stayed friends. He's gone now, obviously, but for years and years. And every once in a while, when I would see him, he would say to me, Roger, remember our conversation out in the sunny day? I said, yeah, meant a lot to me, gave me some perspective. So, yeah, I mean, that was interesting. The best advice, of course, we had this asshole that was in the same building that he couldn't hold a stick to this man. This man was a gentleman. He was, like I say, he was as patriotic as anybody could ever be. He loved this country. But here, an adversary of the US at the time. And he was, he kind of opened the door for me to see, and took the cloud away a little bit. So it was interesting. That was very, very interesting and very observant on his part.
Well, and sounds like it made an impact on him too, like for him to feel compelled enough, because just as you describe him, kind of more of a reserved,
very.
What I would imagine. I mean, I have a friend of mine who's German. She's kind of conservative, and she's like young, right? So this is like that era of men, right? So yeah. I can imagine. So for him to go out of his way and extend a hand like that, obviously sensed something or saw something, or but felt compelled enough for your sake, but I suspect for his sake too, to just
Maybe. I never thought of it that way, but perhaps.
in a good way, not in a negative way.
Oh, yeah, no,
close to
no,
that.
no, in a good way. He was,
Yeah.
and like I say, he was a very, very private person. He wasn't close to anybody. Not that it wasn't that he was an unfriendly person. He kept to himself,
That's right. Yeah.
and he was very professional, very dignified man, very, very well-educated. Just, that was his way.
Mhm. And so then just kind of going off the notes that I got. So we kind of jump from that time, and then it is in your book, and we did mention it in the second podcast. I'm pretty sure we did, at least, discussing when Apocalypse Now came out. And, yeah. So,
oh gosh,
yeah. So, and I guess that's when we come into the parry jab.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Here. But yeah, just what I mean, yeah, you can tell the story because it's
well,
worth telling.
1979, the summer of 1979, the movie Apocalypse Now was released, and I was working at a company that basically not only, but one of the very few people that knew that I was a vet, a Vietnam vet, was the human resources manager. And at this point, I had known her for, I guess, probably at least 3 years, about 3 years, I suppose. And so the movie came out, and on Monday morning, she came out to where I was, and she said, "Hey, Roger, I saw Apocalypse Now over the weekend." I said, "Oh, really?" She said, yeah. And she says, "I never knew that all you vets were either drug addicts or psychopaths." And, it's like, you gotta be kidding me. And I paused for a moment, and the wheels are going like this at warp speed. And I said to her, I said, "Well, that's what you believe. What can I say?" And left it at that.
Yeah.
But I mean, the level of stupidity and ignorance is just unbelievable. But I mean, that again, here it was 10 years after I got home, 4 years after everything was over, and the mentality of some of the people out in the public was just bizarre.
When she said that, was that, especially too, because you're caught so off guard, like that's such like, how could you expect, "Good morning, Roger," right? And then all of a sudden it's wow, you just get smacked in the face with that. But like, was it like the tone, at least, not like I want to get stuck on this, but just for my own curiosity, like, was it in a joking way, or like a serious, like, what was sort of
no, it wasn't joking, not at all. I mean, if it was, I mean, we could have had a good laugh.
I still probably wouldn't say that, but yeah, even as a joke, maybe not a good idea.
He was joking and knew I didn't fall into those categories, and we're just,
that's right. Yeah.
If she had said something like, "Well, this movie, if you believed this movie, you would think everybody was
right.
This or that." No, it was just very, very matter of factly. I mean, I don't know the purpose. Yeah. I don't know the purpose now. I didn't know the purpose then. It just caught me off guard. It just totally caught me off guard. And so like I said, I told her, "That's what you think. That's what you want to believe. Well, what can I say? So be it." And that was the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
And she, walked
Have a good
away.
day. See ya.
Yeah.
Back to HR I go.
Yeah, right. Good representative, huh?
Well, and that's
the other thing, Mark, that I needed to say was this woman she was the sister of one of the owners of the company. So again, you know, you have to not react.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, I wanted to tear into her so bad and call her every name under the sun. And yet, I mean, that falls right in. That's the entrapment.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the validation. Well, yeah, there you go. So, yeah, constantly on guard, you know, but even when things catch you off guard.
Right.
I don't know what was the better choice. If there have been people that I've told this to that said, you had the perfect opportunity to tell her what an idiot she was and how stupid she was and ignorant. Why didn't you do it? Well, you know, maybe they were right. Maybe I should have. I don't know. But to me, you know, you have to, you know, you have to put that shield. You put that shield around you, and not react the way you're expected to react, or the way you can, you know, compromise.
I would. Am I matured? Have I matured? I don't know. But one reaction would be, yeah, to say, you know, oh, that was your opportunity to take a shred off her. But then there's this other saying. It's an old saying. It's pretty harsh actually, but I quite like it because it's been quite helpful to me. Don't cast pearls before swine.
Yeah.
It's pretty harsh, but it's one of those things, like if someone's an idiot, telling them they're an idiot isn't going to help them because they're an idiot. They don't get it.
No, if you argue with an idiot, then what do you become?
Yeah. So it's, yeah. And it's just, it's, I don't know if to say it's unfortunate in the short term. It's unfortunate that, of course, you have to deal with that. Like, of course, that's an unfortunate thing. Like, why? That's a very unfair, ridiculous thing that you would have to deal with two different people, you know, being incredibly rude and insensitive and ignorant. But then it also kind of is interesting because then, you know, you fast forward and it's a much better story for you to sit down with me right now, years later, and to just say, and you know what? And I just let it, you just got to let it go. And you just,
yeah. Well, the thing of it is though, you don't let it go. I mean, it's a cut, you know? It's, you know, you lose another piece, you know, somebody takes another piece out of you. So, you know, you deal, for me, you know, deal with it the best I can. And in my head saying, what a moron I'm dealing with. But the chunk is there. You know, they took a piece of you in the process, you know, because that's, you know, is that what they think of you?
right.
You know, so yeah, I mean, you put it behind you and you move on. But, you know, and you deal with it. And I'm glad I dealt with it the way I did. But it doesn't mean it didn't hurt, and it stays with you. I mean, I can on an emotional, on a feeling level, I can feel it as we're talking today, the same, as intense as, you know, it did in 1979, which is how many years ago now?
Right.
You know.
Well, that does make perfect sense actually, because even just kind of in my own head, I'm like, yeah, I've had some terrible, pretty bad things said to me by some pretty nut job people.
Well, yeah.
But then you also realize that, you know, it just is what it is. But what's interesting, just as we said, or just as you said, that as much as you kind of just cope with it, you deal with it, you still remember it.
Oh yeah.
Still remember it. This many years, decades later, you still remember that, you know?
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. When we get to, I guess this is about 1980. So you also briefly mentioned this in the book as well. There's a friend of yours who was an Episcopal priest. It's such a tongue twister word, but
yeah,
who was also a counselor. And so I'll just kind of throw it to you. So where does that fit into your story?
Well, I felt, the need that I needed to talk to someone, but I couldn't.
Right.
But then it occurred to me that I know this person, that by his ordination, I mean, he's compelled to privacy. And someone I knew and liked was a friend, and I knew I could trust, So, and this was after the apocalypse now. I don't know what the correlation, if there's any, but it was probably within a year. But anyway, I would share some things with him, and he was the first one that suggested that I write a book. He said, your experiences are certainly not average.
Yeah, I would agree.
And very special and unique, and I said, I can't write about this stuff. And it explained, he said, well, then just write it down, and in a journal or something, just put this stuff down. So he was very helpful. I didn't start at that time. I mean, it just wasn't the right time for me to start writing. But he was a good sounding board for me when I would have sessions with him periodically, and he was a good sounding board and a good vent release, pressure release, because that was always there. I mean, it's when somebody, when any veteran that is in combat comes back with a lot of baggage, some more baggage than others, some, but everybody has it. It's just human nature. You can't be involved with these sort of things without having, them haunt you in one way or another, So he was a good sounding board and a good pressure release. I mean, my temper over those years was very, I won't say quick, because I would try to keep it under control, but on a scale of 1 to 60, in a blink of an eye, when it reached that point, it would go from 0 to 60 in a blink of an eye. And that wasn't good, obviously. So so that he was helpful. He was very helpful there, and like I say, somebody I could trust. I knew he wasn't going to judge me. He was a true genuine counselor. His heart was in it, and he was not judgmental, and so he was helpful. It was very helpful.
And just as a note for the listeners or viewers, the reason that you couldn't talk about it was because as part of you could hypothetically talk about your service with 101st Airborne, but because MACVSOG, you guys all signed non-disclosure agreements. So you literally could not speak about that because it was secret.
It was top secret, 20 years, 20-year NDA. And they meant business about adhering to that. I don't know if they were ever enforced it. I don't know that they didn't. But I do know that, and Tilt can tell you this, or any of the other men that were involved, it was a serious matter. It was a very serious matter. And it was so serious that people in my unit from the 101st Airborne, including our first sergeant and our company commander, were not allowed. They were giving very specific instructions and orders that they were not allowed to question me or those of us that were flying with SOG. They were not allowed to ask us anything about it. Nothing. That was forbidden. They made it very clear. And interesting enough, a few years ago, I reconnected with a fellow that was my company commander at the time, and we were talking. We met on a trip when my wife and I were down in North Carolina. He lived in North Carolina, and I asked him. I said, Ron, did you know details? He said, no effing way. He said, I got orders from the commanding general directly. I got orders that I was forbidden to ask any of the men that were flying those missions anything about it. That we were to have a free access and free reign of our time, and that it was just forbidden. He said, I didn't know what the hell was going on. So, but it was very serious, and it wasn't revealed until sometime in the 1990s that the unit even existed. So that's So I couldn't. Who could I talk to? I couldn't talk to anybody. And once the 20 years and 25 years had passed, I wasn't about to tell people that knew I served. Oh, by the way, I mean, how much of a BSer would they think I was if they had known me for so many years, and all of a sudden, I was with this top secret organization. Yeah, right.
Well, that, and also you've kept it, because again, there's some that I was trying to think about, and I'm gonna do my best to tie it in at the end of the podcast as well. But there was something else that you mentioned in the discussion that we had, which was that when you keep something suppressed for years, it becomes the norm.
Yeah.
So that in itself was interesting too, because as you're saying this, I'm kind of trying to put it together in my head, which is even after 20 years go by, and so much has happened in your time from when you've come home, and trying to understand the psychology of that. And then what incentive would you have then to tell anybody about it?
Yeah, no, none. No, there was none. Again, I had no means to back up what I might say. I mean, there was no one. I had nobody that could verify and could validate anything. So why bother? I had encountered wannabes over the years, and after a few questions, realized that my suspicions were that they were a bullshitter, and after a few questions, realized in fact they certainly were. And I did not want. I was super conscious of not wanting to be perceived by anybody as one of these wannabes or stolen valor type people. So, there was no reason to, and again, I just felt that I was going to pretty much take this to the grave, my story, and but then that changed. It changed when things were declassified, when the unit was finally acknowledged that it even existed. I received my Purple Heart unannounced, unceremoniously in the mail, and on 4th of July weekend 2001, just arrived in the mail and in a torn manila envelope that it could have fallen out along the way, and opened it up and thought, well, what do you know? That's after things were declassified and whatnot, I guess. And then fast forward to 2011, when I was contacted by first by my ex-partner, my partner from Vietnam, who had been contacted by one of the SOG guys, telling him that he was trying to track me down and reconnect and present awards that were submitted for us back then, back in the day, that somehow got lost. Supposedly a couple times had been submitted and got lost or trashed or whatever along the way, which I didn't know at the time, but I found out, in recent years, there was a lot of that went on with SOG guys, that people up the chain, not necessarily up the chain of command, but up the chain, jealous of things, of people, of awards, that ended up putting these things in the garbage or wherever, and they never got processed. So anyway, in 2011, Scott Bierman called me, and we reconnected. He said that there are these people that are trying to contact me. They want to reconnect with Special Operations Group. And at that point, things happened quickly. A day or two later, I got a phone call from this fellow, Dick Crawford, who was spearheading the event to get these awards reissued. Dick was a Special Forces combat medic. He was the guy that was strapped to me when we got lifted out of Laos in 1968, and we reconnected. They brought Scott and I and this other fellow, Richard Chapman, who was the co-pilot at the time. They brought us down to Las Vegas. We were invited to join the organization, the Special Operations Association, and we were awarded our medals that we had earned and didn't know we earned way back in 1968. And now I connected with all these people that I served with and hadn't spoken to for 43 years. And now I had validation to, first to my own self that, yeah, you actually did do these. This wasn't a figment of my imagination or something that came to me in a dream. These are the men that I worked with. So that filled a huge void in my soul. Where now I had somebody to talk to and them to talk to me. And so, yeah, that opened up a whole new world for me. And from them, they started really pushing me. People like Tilt, John Meyer, really started pushing me to write my story. Tilt told me that, he said, Roger, your perspective is very different than speaking for himself, than my perspective. You not only knew part of what was going on the ground, but what was taking place in the air and what you saw. So with encouragement from him and some others, that's how the book came about.
A good segue to that, because you also mention it in the book, but in regards to the medals, which are behind you for the people viewing, I think it was in 1990. Can't quite remember, but it is in the book. Pretty sure it was 90. I guess you can correct me. When I believe it was your wife who encouraged you, because you basically kept your medals tucked away. Who encouraged you to let them have some air.
Yeah, it was. The medals that I had at the time, I never put them out because it was half a story.
Right.
Part of the reason it was half a story. And yeah, around 1990, she really was pushing me to put them out. My two adult sons had never seen them at that point. And I wasn't ashamed of them by any stretch. It wasn't that at all. In the early days, I wouldn't put them out because, why would I put out something that I'm going to get criticized over or, slammed over? But so then, years lead into years and they just never went out. So I did around 1990, had my medals put out, had the documents, framed, and that started then. And it was a healing process too, I think. People that saw them said, I had no idea. That was a common thing. Wow, why didn't you put these up? What took so long? Well, that's a longer story.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, I mean, it was by that point in time, people were favorable, and friendly towards vets. I mean, obviously. So yeah, around 1990, I finally dug them out of the cedar chest and put them up.
And what was interesting about that, because obviously I read that portion of the book preparing for the first podcast, and then second and for this podcast, gone back through the book and notes and etc. But what was interesting is after we had done the first one, talking to just friends and family about it, the one thing I say is when we're doing these Zoom calls, if I'm not looking at Roger, I'm looking at his medals. I just think, wow, it's so great. So it's so funny, just the different perspective, because, I'm coming into the situation kind of once things have been resolved for you, it's a very different story now, but it's just so interesting to think, like, when I see it as a podcaster, I'm just like, I feel pride that I have someone who's done so much to deserve, those types of awards. And then to hear that, there was a time where you didn't feel that. And it's just, wow, it's just so, and obviously very happy that, in 2011, then added to it, more, which was fantastic as well. Obviously it's phenomenal to hear.
Just reconnecting in 2011. I mean, that was enough for me. It really was. Yeah. Again, I mean, you can only imagine what that felt like to have these people, not for accolades, just to reconnect that, that we worked together on these top secret missions behind enemy lines over and over and over. The things that we went through together, that was all. I mean, that was icing on the cake. I'll tell you, that really was. Then the awards, of course, I appreciate. I was at that time in 2011. I was awarded my second Distinguished Flying Cross and a Bronze Star from Special Operations, which was, and the other honor was, and I have a picture of it in the book, where I was pinned by Major General Singlov, who was one of the most famous special operators of all time. And when he pinned me and he said to me, he leaned in a little bit and he said, "I'm very proud of you." And that was, this is like getting a compliment from the best of the best, you know. And the other one presenting the award was Major General Bargewell, who both of whom had passed now. But it was just a magical, magical time, and continues to be.
And so might be a bit of a goofy question to ask you, but I was thinking about it just today, which was, so obviously 2011 is many years after even the non-disclosure ended.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I was just kind of wondering was, and the story about the when Scott reconnected was very funny as well. You talk about it in the book. It's quite good. But I was just wondering why didn't you reach out to anybody, or why, or did you?
I didn't.
Didn't. Okay. And was it just? I was just kind of curious about. I'm like, wonder why that was. Yeah.
Well, for one thing, so much time had been going by. I didn't think I'd be able to, that they would even remember me.
Wow. Right. Okay. Yeah.
And the other thing was there was this concern about the non-disclosure that had carryover, I think.
Okay.
It's not like 20 years after in 1988, I thought, oh, good. 20 years have passed. No, I wasn't aware of that at all. I wasn't aware of that. But the first year after I was home, and I don't think I mentioned this in the book, my wife and I were married only, I don't know, 5 or 6 months or so at the time. And I got a phone call in the evening, and it was from a crew chief that served with us, also served with SOG. And he called me up and he said, "Hey," he said, "this is," I'm not even going to mention his name, "this is so-and-so." And I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he said, "Look, I really don't want to be on the phone. Can you meet me? I'm here." And he told me where he was. And it was, in the Bridgeport area where I lived at the time, Bridgeport, Connecticut. And he said, "Please," he said, I need to talk to you." And I said, "Okay, I'll be there in a few minutes, in 20 minutes or so." So Barbara, I said, come with me. I want you to meet this guy." And so we went to the diner where he was, and we walked in, and he was over in the corner. He was back up against the wall. He's over in the corner, and he just signaled me. So I went over and introduced my wife to him, and he was obviously upset. And he said, "Chief, can we talk privately?" I said, "Yeah, sure." My wife went up to the counter and ordered a coffee and whatnot. I said, "What's going on?" And he said, I don't know. I don't know." He said, "But I think someone's after me." I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, let me explain." He lived in Florida. And he explained to me that he had applied to the police department. And after he had applied to the police department, he did paperwork, did some testing and whatnot. And they told him that, it's going to take a few weeks, and there are some background checks and this and that. So he said that his neighbors, first one and then another, stopped him and told him that there were some men there asking about him. And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, you were going to get the background check." He said, "Yeah." He said, "But they weren't asking about my civilian background. They were asking me about my experience in the military and who I served with, and asked some, just odd questions. Were you ever involved in any kind of atrocities? And and I said no.
Okay.
So yeah, one of his other neighbors, the same thing. Then he went to the police station and said, "Hey, what gives? What's going on here?"
Right.
And they said, "What are you talking about?" And he told them, said, "No, we haven't sent anybody out. We haven't sent out. We check, we go through files, we go through, see if there's anything in your arrest, record or anything like that."
Mhm.
And he panicked. He said that, he said, I mentioned to a couple people that we were running top secret missions and we were into Laos and North Vietnam and whatnot. And he said, I think they're coming after me. Now, that was the last time I ever saw him or heard from him. He was heading up to Maine. His wife's uncle or somebody owned property up in Maine, up in the forest in Maine somewhere. He said, "I'm going there." He said, "If they're after me, they won't find me." And that was the last time I ever heard from him. Never heard from him again. So Scott knows, my partner Scott knows his story. And this fella, he never liked this fella. He thought he was a little bit off the deep end. And, I liked him. He was a good soldier. But anyway, Scott seemed to think that he was just, maybe he was paranoid. And, but he didn't know who these investigators were. He said they just showed up and, in suits, didn't give any ID. They said that they were doing the background checks on him for the police department.
So they knew that too. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that always stayed in the back of my mind as well.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Now, knowing this fella, yeah, I mean, could he? I didn't see him when we were in the military. I didn't see him as someone who would panic or go off the deep end. I never saw that side of him. He was a good professional. But like I say, Scott saw something in him that he didn't like. So I don't know. But this always weighed in the back of my mind too. So as time went on, I didn't have it written on the calendar. 20 years is up. It's just by that point in time, what good is it?
That's such a heartbreaking story too. Oh my goodness, that's terrible.
Again, I don't know. I really, to be clear, I don't know if it was a figment of his imagination, if he was just getting paranoid. But he was visibly scared. I'd never seen him like that. He was a pretty cool mannered character, cool with his nerves, cool. And as a matter of fact, when Scott and I got shot down in September in Laos, he was in our wing ship that that was with us, tried to protect us, but then had to leave. So I really don't know, but it left the mark with me, the question mark. So I don't know.
Well, what's interesting about that, because I've listened to, I'm all caught up on John's podcast now, John Strykermeyer, for the listeners, who's been on twice, which is, he kind of got the ball rolling with all this, which was
pretty, you did.
But what was interesting, I don't remember the episode. It was one of his first, it was kind of around the first dozen or so, that's about as that's about as specific as I can get. But I remember one of the guys was saying that there was a CIA spook type guy going through his garbage to see if there was anything in violation of the non-disclosure. But and what's so heartbreaking about that story that you told too is I mean, for all we know, I mean, there's like 100 different possibilities, but even if it's just the case of, yeah, maybe some people actually did come to check it out, and the combination of that, and this is only a year later, so who knows what his state of mind is. And even just for you, when you're describing what it was like for you coming back a year later, you were very, it's touchy in a way, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And even something innocent enough, that might be enough to trigger, a very negative response in another person, right? But I mean, again, it's so many possibilities. But so I guess that does answer my question. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's such a terrible thing. But
but it was, again, another branding into the brain that put it in a compartment, and just it's there.
Of course. Yeah. And so timing wise, we got a few minutes. But one of the things that, I guess we're kind of good. We'll kind of wrap up here, but one of the things to wrap up on, I guess I can edit it out if I can't say. I don't think it's a problem, but I'm very excited to be meeting you and John and many others at the event. Special Operations Association reunion. I always mess those acronyms up, but I think I got that one right.
You got it.
Vegas in October. I'm very much looking forward to that. And actually what was so funny was that in the podcast, John's podcast with Tim, Schaff, he was mentioning you because obviously the mission, which we covered on second episode with you. But I am giddy. I am literally counting. I already got it booked. I already know what's going on. It's fantastic. But I just wanted to say, it's been very interesting for myself, considering that when I started the podcast, a few years ago, I never imagined. I mean, really, I really didn't have much of an idea of what I was doing, other than I feel like I want to do this. I think this is a good thing to do, and let's just see how this thing plays out. And to now be here several years later, to have met so many incredible people, you, John, and also Dale Hansen, who's another Green Beret who served with MACVSOG, who's we're going to be recording in 2-3 weeks. I mean, it's just remarkable. I mean, I really feel so fortunate to be in this position and to be able to just, and you're so good with me. You let me just pick your brain about everything, which is fantastic because I'm pesky. I know that. But I mean,
there was a time that would not have happened.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I just feel very, very grateful for that. And I'm so excited to meet you all in person. And I just wanted to say, thank you. I mean, these are, as much as, kind of alluded to it earlier, and, I've even as a kid, I've always been interested in so many different things. And I kind of always felt like I never really fit in anywhere, because I was kind of too nerdy for the sports guys, and then not hippie enough for the music people. And so, I'm interested in all these things, but I have to say, more and more, as I improve myself through hosting this podcast and really trying to push myself to create, the best content that I can, and through different ways and different conversations, I feel just right at home, sitting in this chair and being able to sit down with so many interesting people. And yeah, I just wanted to say, thank you, and to for you to extend the invitation is to come down there, and I'm just so excited to be a fly on the wall. That's all. I just want to hang out. I just want to see. I just want to observe.
I hope it's not anticlimactic.
No, I think it's gonna be great. I'm just gonna hang out. I'm just gonna do my thing.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, thank you so much, and to share your story and spend so much time with me. Doing these. I think this is
You're very
7
welcome.
hours.
It's been enjoyable. You're a good host.
Thank you very much. So I mean, I think we can kind of end there. Any final thoughts from yourself?
No, just glad to do this with you. You're a good host. You're a good interviewer. You make us very comfortable in doing this.
Great. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.